Chapter 26, Introduction to the Biosphere. Section 26.4, Life and Evolution. So let's talk a little bit about evolution. This idea was first described accurately in Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, in 1859. And just by looking at observations of life in Charles Darwin's various voyages around the world, he came up with this idea that was highly accurate for the times. So the idea is evolution, and evolution describes a process by which a species can change their adaptations over time. And these changes and adaptations are a function of adapting to the environment that these organisms live in through mutations in their DNA. So, for example, Darwin examined the variety of different finches that existed on the Galapagos Islands, and he theorized that these finches had an ancestor that lived on the mainland in South America. The ancestor arrived on the island and then diversified into different species as individuals began living in different environments on the island. So birds that whose food source was insects developed a beak that allowed them to capture insects better. Birds that ate other types of food developed other beaks. And it's really interesting that he was able to come up with this very accurate explanation of how evolution works. So let's talk more about how evolution works. I suggested that what you required was mutations. So if the mutations are beneficial, they can be selected by the environment, and we call this natural selection. And natural selection determines which individuals will survive in the environment, which ones will pass on their genes to their offspring. Mutations are constantly happening in any group of individuals belonging to a species, and these mutations aren't usually isolated. They occur at the same time in a number of different individuals. So, for example, if you were a fish and your ancestors were all yellow, and then a blue mutation occurred, and the blue mutation meant that you'd have a greater ability to hide from predators, your offspring would have a higher chance of survival, and over time the yellow individuals, the ancestors, would disappear, and the blue individuals would become dominant. So as I said, mutations are constantly adding new adaptations to a species gene pool. So gene pool represents all the genes that are available in a population of individuals. And because the environment is always changing, it's not remaining static over time, different genes are always being selected for at different times. And if the gene is beneficial at a particular time in the state of the environment, then those individuals will survive best. Another important factor related to evolution is spatial isolation. If you can isolate a population from or a subpopulation from the main population, this can enhance the changing of adaptations in that subpopulation, as there isn't gene transfer between the main population and the subpopulation. So spatial isolation is very important for evolution. Spatial isolation may be due to just distance, mountain barriers, a river, etc. And as I said, spatial isolation causes a reduction in gene transfers between subpopulations and the main population. An example, a really good example of natural selection was with wild guppies in, I think it was Trinidad, by scientist John Endler. And these guppies now go by the common name of Endler's guppies. And what he noticed was that the coloration of these guppies varied from being very bright and colorful and drab and boring. And what he found was it depended upon whether or not predators existed in the stream with the guppies. If there were predators, the bright colored guppies would be absent or few in number, and the drab guppies would dominate. They were less likely to be seen by the predators. If there was no predators, then the bright colored guppies became dominant. And he was able to do experiments where he removed or added predators and saw a change occur in the coloration of guppies over time, over short periods of time. Now keep in mind that no two environments are the same. Even in the example in the previous lecture where we looked at the lakes and walleye, that fish type, the lakes, you may assume that they're the same because they're in the same general environment, northern Canada, but in reality there are slight differences, and those differences act differently on the populations that exist in each lake. And mutations are always occurring. They're random events. Many mutations are not beneficial. Only a few are probably beneficial. But if they are beneficial and the environment is right and natural selection selects for them, then those individuals become dominant over time. Another interesting study of evolution is is the one that I'm going to talk about in a minute. It concerns a salamander that exists on the west coast of North America. The ancestor population was believed to originate from Washington State and Oregon. So the salamander has the species name of Anasatina eschultzi, and there's a whole bunch of subspecies, 5 different subspecies. So what we're going to see in this example is something called divergent evolution created by spatial isolation. So the ancestor species developed in, as I said, in Oregon, and it's given the number 1. So the salamanders marched down the west coast into California, and their populations separated on either side of a dry valley in the center of California. So we get different subspecies developing as you move south. The final 2 subspecies, number 4 and 5, over time they became so different that they were unable to interbreed. So there was so much evolution that had gone on between the 2 separated species as they marched down the valley that when they met again at the south end of the valley, they were very different from each other. And so this is an example of divergent evolution. What was once just one species diverged into 2 different species because of spatial isolation, and that isolation being created by the San Joaquin Valley in the center of California.